So fundamentally, AI systems are based on mathematics, right? So you need to create a system which must not be made of inanimate matter. It could theoretically also be of animate matter. So by using organisms or so to create an AI system, but you must have a model of how to do this.
Okay, this is rapidly going off the rails. Welcome to Doom Debates. I'm Liron Shapira. Today I'm reacting to a recent interview of Jobst Landgrebe on the Geopolitics and Empire podcast. Jobst, and by the way that's spelled Jobst, is a German mathematician, computer scientist, and entrepreneur known for his critical views on artificial intelligence. He is the co-author, along with the philosopher Barry Smith, of the 2022 book Why Machines Will Never Rule the World, Artificial Intelligence Without Fear, which argues against the idea that AI will ever achieve human-like intelligence or consciousness. Landgrebe's work spans the fields of mathematics, computer science, and philosophy, where he explores the theoretical limits of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Landgrebe has a background in both academia and industry, having worked extensively on practical AI applications. In addition to his writing, he has contributed to the debate on AI's potential impact on society, technology, and ethics. When we dive into this interview, you're going to see he pretty quickly gets to his core argument, which has to do with the physical difficulty of building a software system that can replicate the human brain at a low level with fine detail. That's his huge sticking point that he writes about in his book and that he talks about in this podcast interview. I don't think you're going to be very convinced by Jobst, but the particular reasons why I disagree with him may be of interest. So let's dive in.
You talk about artificial general intelligence, AGI, and how for mathematical reasons, it's impossible. Some of these things that the Elon Musks of the world and others are telling us, this idea of machines ruling the world, becoming sentient, right? So tell us about the thesis you've been working on and why we can relax a bit. Why Skynet will not become self-aware, as I like to say.
Yes. So basically, when I started working in AI, I just saw it as a form of applied mathematics, which it is. It's basically a form of working with data and finding patterns in data and using these patterns for two purposes. One reason is to find new patterns, really, like it's done in astrophysics, for example, with AI-based methods since many decades. And another way to use it is to automate repetitive processes. So when you have a process that has a regular pattern, you can kind of use the AI to identify the pattern and also to automate it.
This is a common move people make who are trying to downplay the potential power of AI. They basically say, look, it's just extrapolating a pattern. That's all it's doing. That's kind of similar to people saying, look, it's just talking English in the case of LLMs. It's just giving you a sentence that sounds good, or a popular favorite, it's just doing statistics. It's just giving you something that's statistically likely. It's interpolating. What's misleading when they make statements like that is that they're defining a category of things where that category of things actually contains powerful, scary superintelligence. So for instance, if it's just talking English, well, what if it's a super genius at telling you the plan to take over the world in English? That's just talking English. Similarly, in the Martin Casado episode, when he says, yeah, it's just statistical extrapolation, his host, Nathan Labenz, asked him a scenario to comment on the idea of super intelligently engineering cell behavior, which is a ridiculously complex system, engineering cell behavior. But Martin's response was to be like, oh yeah, engineering cell behavior, that's also statistical extrapolation. It's just more statistical extrapolation. So it's this very sneaky move that a lot of people make to downplay AI when they say, it's just this category, but the category potentially gets ridiculously powerful. And they don't seem to explicitly acknowledge that. They think that they've successfully downplayed what AI can do by fitting it into this category. Or in the case of what Jobst is saying here, it's just extrapolating patterns like they use for astrophysics. Okay, well, what if solving astrophysics is something that it can do? Because that meets your definition. Isn't solving astrophysics kind of a superhuman ability? And yeah, it didn't have that ability, but it's not because your definition of extrapolating patterns in astrophysics is meaningfully constraining what it can do. You're just sneaking in this idea of it being limited. What you mean is, oh, it's really limited, it's not scary. But what you're saying is, it's only extrapolating patterns. Like, you're not acknowledging what a super intelligent pattern extrapolator would be capable of doing. You're just being imprecise how you're trying to communicate that AI isn't a big deal.
And that's what AI is, and that's what I started with in 1998 when I started as a young postdoc, was my first postdoc position. And since then, it continued to evolve. I think that was during the second AI winter, and now we are the third AI wave. And that started in 2012 when Google published an algorithm of which they said it could by itself recognize a face of a cat, which was wrong, but still that created quite some hype, and then many other hype things happened to create the AI wave. We are currently in this enthusiasm of AI, the belief that AI systems will develop consciousness and intelligence.
I actually don't make any claims about AI developing consciousness. I think the relationship between consciousness and intelligence is kind of fuzzy. I suspect it's orthogonal. I suspect you can get a really high level of intelligence while avoiding consciousness, whatever that means, but I'm confused about the topic. It's possible that they go hand in hand, but I think it's more precise to say that my claim, and the claim of many people I know, is that intelligence of AI is coming and it's going to be superhuman pretty soon, not necessarily consciousness.
And why is this wrong? So fundamentally, AI systems are based on mathematics, right? So you need to create a system which must not be made of inanimate matter. It could theoretically also be of animate matter. So by using organisms or so to create an AI system, but you must have a model of how to do this.
Okay, this is rapidly going off the rails. AI systems are based on mathematics, right? Yeah, what else? I mean, the whole universe has a big mathematical model, right? When we understand the universe, we're understanding the math of the universe. So whenever somebody comes out of the gate saying, but it's made of math, it's like, yes, aren't we just talking about how epistemology works in general? Aren't we just talking about what it means to talk about something that we're talking about it mathematically? And then he goes on to say, it must not be made of inanimate matter. I mean, something that we discovered a couple 100 years ago is that things that are animate, like animals or like, organs, parts of your body, your head responding to your will, when you go down at a low enough level, you don't just get animate level after animate level, all right? At a low enough level, suddenly you get inanimate matter, right? So the whole concept of animation or spirits or animism or whatever you want to call it is a high level phenomenon. It's not built into the laws of physics. You're not going to see it in the atoms or the quarks or at a low level. You're only going to see it as a property of some inanimate low-level configurations. So I don't know where Jobst is going yet. I'm listening to it for the first time. This is my first exposure to Jobst Landgrebe, but it's a very weak start if he's already talking about inanimate matter and mathematics.
So you must basically know what you want to do, which steps you want to do to engineer the AI, and that means that in the end you need equations that describe the AI. And mathematical equations, we can have a lot and they're very useful, but they have a limited scope. So mathematics is a science that has a limited scope. This is very, very hard to understand because for most of our contemporaries, it seems that mathematics and the sciences based on mathematics have totally revolutionized everything, like modern physics, like since industrialization. It has totally changed our natural biosphere in which we were living before to a technosphere. And this is so impressive that we can have this conversation on Zoom, that you can take an airplane, that I could visit you in 10 hours, I could be in Mexico and to meet you and so on. It's so impressive. Why it took, 5 or 6 weeks 200 years ago. And so it's so impressive also what the medical progress, that people believe that there's no limit to this modeling of nature.
Hell yeah, that's exactly what I believe. I think we've seen incredibly strong evidence that that's the case, but go on.
In reality, that's not the case. In reality, we have already used up in the applications of physics most of the great inventions that were made up to 1925, when quantum physics was formalized by Schrödinger, or 26 it was, and we have used up a lot of this and are now stagnating in physics since 100 years. We make much less discoveries, but we still apply in technology the discoveries made before 1926. And so we are now faced with a slowdown of the technical progress. But for the contemporaries, this is not visible yet. They are euphorized by the mobile phone development of the last 20 years. I mean, social media and so on. So they cannot, because they don't know what's happened in physics, they cannot anticipate what I can already see, that we are now the progress is limited.
What? Even if you assume that the understanding of physics that we have is just never going to get any better and we're just blocked on physics, that still allows for a ton of progress, because most of the technological progress that gets made is abstracted away from whatever the laws of physics are. For instance, if I want to build another software algorithm, I don't have to worry about the details of my computing hardware, right? It's an innovation in software. And if we ever understand physics better, great, maybe we can make faster computer chips, but that doesn't affect my software innovation. I mean, it might add a multiplier on the efficiency of my software innovation, but my software innovation could already be exponentially faster even without that multiplier. So the idea that physics is a bottleneck for all innovation, I think, is massively overstated. I think physics is an area that we could stand to do a little bit better in. And yeah, there has been some stagnation, but partly it's because of diminishing marginal returns. If we learn the perfect theory of everything and have a full understanding of physics, there's a very good chance that that'll not actually improve the sum of our tech progress by that much. It's very possible that we've already reaped the majority of returns that our species is ever going to reap from physics progress, and all the progress beyond that is going to be done on engineering that mostly uses levels of physics that we already understand today in 2024. So again, another head scratcher here from Jobst. I think we're diverging very quickly on some very foundational beliefs, but let's follow his train of thought further.
Now, why am I saying this? Because I want you and the audience to understand where this euphoria for mathematics comes from. It comes from this very rapid development that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 generations, and people now just linearly extrapolate it as if it would continue to go on like this. But that's not happening.
Yes, it is.
And why that's not happening, that's very interesting. And this is now an argument mainly from physics. So when we think of physics and technology, we always think of the positive results of physics. And of course, a very positive result is nuclear fission, because we can have nuclear plants. Okay, we can also have atomic bombs, which is not so nice, but we can have nuclear plants. And then there are many other, also quantum mechanics has led to very positive results, like the laser and transistors and many other things. And but physics also has negative results. And the main negative results have been achieved in thermodynamics. And thermodynamics is a branch of physics which is about the, which has major laws, the first and second law of thermodynamics. Many have heard this at school, but most have not realized that thermodynamics also delimits in statistical mechanics the boundaries of physics. This is a negative result from physics. And this negative result hasn't been appreciated very much with all this euphoria about the program.
I'm skeptical about a distinction between positive and negative physics. Like, it's true that some insights in physics and computer science and all kinds of fields are insights about what is hard or impossible to do, for sure. But I wouldn't be quick to label that negative physics, because if you start getting insight about what you can't do, you might actually be a better engineer, because the process of engineering is the process of searching a space of designs. And if you have a level of insight, thanks to your negative physics, that tells you, hey, don't bother searching this space of designs because it's not going to work, like it violates conservation of energy, for instance. If you start crossing out a big section of your exponentially sized search space when you're trying to search for designs, you're going to become a better engineer, because you're going to be able to narrow down to the space of good designs more easily. So I wouldn't be quick to call limitation theorems, speed of light, conservation of energy, second law of thermodynamics. I wouldn't be so quick to call these negative physics, right? They're just more physics, and yes, they're boundaries, but they could be positive in the sense that they're helpful to increasing your engineering power.
And this negative result says that there are systems in nature that have essential properties. So properties which are really related to their very nature, that prevent mathematical modeling of these systems. And this is the core argument we make, that the human mind is a complex system. And such complex systems, in the sense of thermodynamics, they cannot be modeled mathematically for structural reasons of mathematics. They're incompatible with our approach to modeling reality with mathematics.
I don't think any known theorems significantly prevent the ability to model systems like the human brain. The second law of thermodynamics says that it's going to be really hard to model it. It might take a lot of resources and generate a lot of waste heat. Or it might say that we can't model it at a very low level, practically. Also, if you think the brain is a quantum computer, which it's pretty obviously not, but some people do, then quantum theory tells you that you can't perfectly replicate a quantum state. So that's a limitation theorem. But we have much stronger theorems that tell us that you can have a copy of a computational system like the brain and have it be arbitrarily high fidelity for computational purposes and not worry about any of these low-level constraints, because fundamentally the brain does its work digitally. When neurons fire, they just have to reach some threshold to make other neurons fire, similar to how digital logic works inside of a computer. If you don't get the threshold perfectly to perfect accuracy, it's okay. The brain is not encoding information in like the 100th decimal place of these kind of firing limits. It's a fundamentally digital system in how it does its computation. I can't tell you that with 100% certainty, but I just consider it overwhelmingly likely, just in terms of like, why wouldn't it be? Why would evolution not take the easy way out and make the brain digital? Which is the same as my skepticism about the brain being a quantum computer. It's like, why? Why would evolution do that? There's nothing that humans do that makes us need to be a quantum computer. Like, you're really using quantum theory just to make humans grope their way through like basic epistemology, basic bumbling science. Like, you don't need this complexity. You don't need this way over-engineered analog thermodynamic computer architecture. You can just do it with a naive digital computer. So that's one piece of evidence why I consider it obvious that the brain's architecture is a classical digital computer. Another piece of evidence is just look at all the other animals. We're simulating them better and better. We're not running into any major problems. And so it would be weird if suddenly this fundamental architecture that we have no problem simulating takes a huge left turn when it gets to humans and something evolves like in the last million years that's so different from everything else on like, you know, a 1 megabyte genetic difference at most. It just, you know, again, I can't rule it out entirely, but it just seems like wild speculation to me compared to a pretty confident hypothesis that it's just a classical computer running a certain algorithm. So Jobst's claim that you can't model the human brain with mathematics seems deeply confused. It's not that I'm 100% confident, it's just that all the evidence I've seen has pointed one way. I've seen pretty much no evidence why to suspect any of the stuff about the brain. I guess the only evidence I've seen is just the fact that we haven't perfectly proven that we can have a superhuman AI or a perfect copy of the brain yet. So until it's conclusively proven that we can engineer a brain replica or a perfect scan of a brain, then he still has an opportunity to say that his thesis is plausible, right? So that's why I can't be 100% sure. But I think this is a weak line of argument.
This is the core argument of the book. And now I give you the opportunity to ask questions, and then I will maybe detail it a bit more.
Yeah, I think that last argument you just made, that's kind of what convinced me regarding what you're saying, that they cannot, because they talk about, you know, the Ray Kurzweils of the world, basically getting access to our soul, right? They talk about the singularity and saying that they'll be able to copy your soul and upload your consciousness, which for me is synonymous with your soul consciousness, your essence, and then putting that into a digital computer and living forever. And I don't think that's possible. I feel like only God can access your soul. There's no technology that can ever have that capability, and kind of refers to what you're talking about. They cannot model. They have to first model like the mind and the soul, and they can't do that.
All right, we're all the way down the slippery slope of AI skeptic claims to the rock bottom where you say only God can access your soul. I'm not going to debate God, but I will observe that humans seem to be gaining access to deeper and deeper levels of your soul, because today we have AI-assisted technology that can scan your brain and detect what mental imagery you're seeing. So you can even try to paint something in your mind, in your mind's eye, and you can even get a rough reading on the computer screen of what your mind's eye is painting. So maybe your soul is beneath that, but your soul's mind's eye is now something that's accessible to AI and to reading, right? So it seems like your soul has to beat a line of retreat and be like, well, the emotional feeling that I have is my soul. Okay, but we can start scanning your emotional feeling. But you could be like, well, the free will that I have that's generating that stuff is my soul. It's like, okay, but we can find like strong correlations with the decision that your free will is going to make. So it seems like even that part of your soul is now retreating away from the perceptive ability of our scanning technology. You know, it's very much God of the gaps. But I get why, as long as AI can't perfectly 100% replicate the input-output behavior of everybody's brain, it's going to keep being an attractive claim to make, to say only God can access your soul and technology can't model the brain, and the brain is infinitely special. And therefore, there will never be superintelligence. Because ultimately, the payoff of all this for a lot of people is they can sit in their room at night and the anxiety can creep in and they can bat that anxiety away because they can say, hey, this God that I have faith in, the fact that we don't have human level AI yet is a good support pillar for my faith and my belief that everything's going to be okay because I'm going to die and go to heaven because I have this tapestry of religious beliefs. And as long as superintelligent AI doesn't get proven out as this thing that can exist, then my religion is more likely to be correct. But that said, I don't come here because I want to make specific psychoanalysis accusations of people in particular. So maybe Hervoye is wired totally differently and he's analyzing it totally rationally and he's totally willing to abandon the belief that God can't access your soul. He just wants to hear evidence. We can be charitable and give him the benefit of the doubt that that's the kind of person he is.
I wanted to read from your book here, quote, AI feeds most conspicuously into what is now called transhumanism, the idea that technologies to enhance human capabilities will lead to the emergence of a new post-human beings. On one scenario, humans themselves will become immortal because they will be able to abandon their current biological bodies and live on forever in digital form. So, what do you think they're up to here?
So, because you are referring to the soul, which we don't do in the book. Privately, I do it because I'm a Christian, but as a scientist, I don't, because it's not part of science, it's part of theology. And today, I mean, since a couple of centuries, we have this distinction. Since the 18th century, we separate into theology and science. So I'm not using a theological argument. Neither am I using an existential argument, which in the tradition of Heidegger, which is what some critics of AI did. But my Barry Smith, my co-author, and my argument is really geared towards the properties of these complex systems.
Okay, so Jobst is a Christian, but he's going to be careful not to make a theological argument for his beliefs. He's going to make an argument that's supposed to be convincing to atheists like me. Fair enough.
So the properties of complex systems, they have an evolutionary character. That means that their properties can change unexpectedly, and that they cannot only acquire new elements, but also new element types. Like bacteria, they can also obtain a new genetic element that they didn't have before that enhances their properties in an unexpected way. This is how they acquire antibiotic resistance, for example. And simple systems cannot do that. Complex systems, they also, what is very, very important, they have a non-ergodic phase space. So that means that when you sample events from their behavior, you never get the same pattern. Whereas in an ergodic space, when you sample from it, you can make sure over time that every sample has the same likelihood and the same distribution, or is drawn from an overall distribution. And like when you sample, for example, water from this glass, and this glass is not moving at all, then it will be composed everywhere in the same way chemically. That's an ergodic system. But when you start to shake it like I do now, it becomes non-ergodic because if now I shake heavily and air gets into it, then the distribution of the air molecules and water molecules is different at every space. And whenever I sample something, it will always be different. I cannot find a pattern anymore. That's called non-ergodicity. So for example, every wave of water is non-ergodic. That's why we also have a wave on the book cover. Because waves are non-ergodic systems. So if you sample forever the composition of a wave, you can never predict the next wave. So these systems are unpredictable. They are in a way patternless. And mathematical models, they always need repetitive patterns.
Wait. Mathematical models always lead to repetitive patterns? Come on, it's so easy to make a mathematical model of such a simple system, like a very simple cellular automaton like Conway's game of life, is super chaotic and is arbitrarily complex. It's known to be Turing complete. So you can literally have any pattern of any arbitrary complexity evolving in a simple, two-dimensional, discrete cellular automaton like Conway's game of life. Similarly, you can have a classical computer running a classical computer program, which could potentially, I claim, simulate the human brain. But whether or not it can simulate the human brain, it can simulate systems that we know are arbitrarily chaotic, arbitrarily non-ergodic, arbitrarily complex. I'm sure Jobst knows this, but the fact that a statement slipped out, like the idea that mathematical models always need repetitive patterns, he's at best being super imprecise and misleading. I'm already getting the sense that his MO, which is pretty common, is to basically blur levels of organization, to not realize that higher levels of organization can be qualitatively different from the lower levels that they're built on, because it gets back to something you said before, this idea of inanimate matter, right? So to him, it's hard to think about these animated beings that their low-level constituents are inanimate. And it seems like that's what he's saying now. He can't imagine a chaotic system where if you dig down to the rule, oh, it's just like a simple game of life rule. It's a simple automaton rule. He can't seem to visualize complexity emerging from simple rules and discreteness and classical computation. So I may be wrong about how I'm interpreting him. He probably has more subtle claims that we'll hear later in the podcast, but so far I'm just confused and frustrated.
So this is a hard reason why we can't use mathematics to model them properly. Also, by the way, this evolutionary character, it also means that in mathematics you always have a Cartesian system, vector space, in which you project the data points. And if you can suddenly add a new coordinate to this coordinate system, the data point will not fit in anymore. That's also to put it in easy, in layman's terms. And that's why this doesn't work.
His terms there aren't layman enough, because I'm pretty confused about the way he's using Cartesian points to make his point. But I get the gist. It's complex and hard to model, yeah.
And then also the complex systems are driven. So they have a flow of energy flowing through them. So bacteria create energy from that matter. We do this as well. You know, we consume dioxide and exhale carbon dioxide. And this is because we use the oxygen to make energy out of nutrition in the citrate cycle and in the mitochondria. And this is so there's a constant flow of energy through complex systems. And this flow of energy creates turbulence and many other phenomena that cannot be modeled mathematically.
No. The flow of energy through the cells of the human brain is something that the human brain's operation abstracts away. The way that the neurons fire is only very slightly affected by the current energy levels of those neurons. Like, sure, those neurons can run out of energy or run out of oxygen and die and shut down, similar to a computer, right? If you cut the power supply, and maybe the power supply is about to cut out and it operates at slightly less than the normal voltage before cutting out entirely. So yeah, the computer is going to have a transition between working and not working. But the thing about a digital system like that is that it tends to either just work the way it's supposed to or shut down. And that's mostly what you're going to get with the human brain. It usually just does its job or it doesn't do its job based on whether it has the normal amount of energy and other operational parameters. So this idea of like, oh, you have to model the energy flowing through if you want to get an accurate read on the human brain. I mean, yeah, if you go down to the lowest levels, right? It's the same question as before. Do you have to model every quark? Do you have to model every energy flow? The answer is almost certainly no. We have so much experience with different systems that are arbitrarily complex and yet don't need to be modeled at the lowest levels.
Heisenberg said when he dies and talks to Peter or God in heaven, God will certainly explain to him how general relativity works, but what it's caused by, but not turbulence, that God will not be able to explain turbulence. Turbulence is a basic phenomenon of complex systems. And so in the end, modern physics knows that we cannot mathematically model complex systems, but our mind is complex. The processes in it are complex. We don't know how it works. And that's why we can't model it. This is very, very important to appreciate. That's why I took now again a few minutes to explain this once more.
a bird's wing flying through the air with all the turbulence of those air particles. Nonetheless, you can have a computer simulator that's pretty good at it, right? Not 100% perfect, but good enough for engineering, and can be made more and more precise at the expense of, let's say, more and more computation time and space, right? Computational resources. But we're pretty familiar with those trade-offs, and we get the accuracy levels that we need to get. You might say, no, fluid dynamics is such a complex, chaotic system that once you let it progress for a few time steps, it's hopelessly lost to any attempt at simulation. The inaccuracy is going to grow. And you can say the same thing about the human brain. You could say, how do you know that the simulation quality isn't just going to slip away from your grasp the more steps you run it? But here's the thing. These systems, these engineered systems, or these naturally selected systems, like a bird's wing or an airplane's wing or a human brain or an AI, these kinds of systems, they only are engineerable to natural selection or to humans to the degree that they're predictable. So when we go and we model them, like when we go and we model a human brain, yeah, we're not going to literally get it perfect at every level, but the degree to which we can model it is at least the degree to which natural selection was able to select on its genes. So we can model the work that the genes are doing that natural selection sees fit to replicate. The fidelity of natural selection deciding, yeah, this is a good brain architecture, let me copy it into the next generation, to the degree that it has enough information to make a survival probability decision like that, we can also have similar fidelity as modelers to predict whether the brain will do that kind of relevant behavior, the same way that the genes of the next generation effectively make that prediction. To the extent that things are chaotic, that's fine. We can't predict every little atom, but that's not going to be relevant to the part of the brain's architecture that was selected to be there in the first place. A brain gets built out of DNA. And if the brain ever has a new behavior that's worth adding a new base pair into the DNA to keep into the next generation, then that behavior has to be sufficiently consistent and predictable across generations. Therefore, it's going to be modelable by humans. So whatever the genes can naturally select for, almost certainly is a property that humans can notice and model. Natural selection doesn't say these should be the genes for your brain based on an infinitely precise simulation of what the brain is going to do. It's based on noticing, oh, this brain did a good job running roughly these algorithms. Then you might say, okay, but there's going to be other properties that don't get encoded and copied into the genes. They're just like byproducts of what happens when the genes build a brain. They're part of the brain that's not directly genetically encoded, but it's affected by the environment. Yeah, you can always try to make those claims that things won't be engineerable, that things will just be too complicated, that chaos will win over engineering. And I guess the strongest time when you might be right is like weather prediction 5 years into the future, right? So even a super intelligent AI might struggle to predict the weather 5 years into the future. That might be a good scenario where chaos really does triumph over order, okay? But most of the time, engineering just seems to win. Natural selection just seems to make brains that are very robust and predictable for what they need to do to accomplish survival and replication. Similarly, humans seem to be able to build systems like airplanes that are just extremely reliable. Even though fluid dynamics is a nightmare, in point of fact, we have planes that go millions of miles without an accident, right? That's what happens in practice. So Jobst is basically just denying that when it comes to the human brain. He's basically saying, no, this is going to collapse into chaos. And that just doesn't seem to be the case for something like the human brain.
Now, what do these technocratic elites want to do? Why are they, like Yuval Harari is a good example, right? He's a historian. He has no clue of mathematics. He doesn't understand physics, biochemistry, chemistry, biology. He really doesn't understand, but he believes that we can now with science totally change mankind. So he believes in digital immortality, in transhumanism, that we can create cyborgs, that we can genetically manipulate humans to create higher intelligence and all of this. And what these people get wrong. So why do they believe in this? Because they extrapolate, like it was done in the 18th century by people like Lagrange and Laplace and La Métrie, these French Enlightenment philosophers. They believe that nature can perfectly be modeled with mathematics.
I mean, if you just want to genetically engineer humans to have higher intelligence, a naive program of artificial selection, basically breeding the smartest humans you can find, that's much more likely than not to work, right? I mean, it's never even been tried seriously across that many generations. Why shouldn't it work? I'm pretty optimistic that it'll lead to smarter humans than the smartest humans who have ever lived, something like a 200 IQ human, because I think we're going to remove a lot of constraints. Like if they have a bunch of diseases that come with breeding for high IQ, we now have the technology to cure a lot of those diseases or manage them. And also, if their head is really, really big, right, that's a constraint that natural selection ran into. It couldn't make your head too big, even though it sure tried. Well, now we have C-section, so the head can actually get a lot bigger, right? So even without these kind of bonus things, even if you just kept all the traditional evolutionary constraints without using this kind of modern medicine and C-sections, or even without any of that, just doing a breeding program should work fine. So it's interesting to me that Jobst is pushing back on this idea of, oh my God, genetically engineering intelligence. That's so hard. That's so chaotic. How will we ever do that? It's like, come on, man, that's an easy one.
And Laplace believes that if you can measure every motion in the universe or on Earth and put it in a gigantic system of differential equations, you can predict the future perfectly. He called this the Laplacian demon that could predict everything.
I think that is true in a certain deep sense. Like, I do think the universe probably has a mathematical model that could be written down in a larger universe. Like, there's no particular reason why that can't be the case. People will be like, oh, what about quantum uncertainty? But if you believe in quantum many worlds, as I do, you simply write down all the information about all the worlds, and suddenly you're back to having a deterministic system. So I do think that's useful to be like, hey, there's some whiteboard in some larger universe that just writes down everything there is to know about our universe. And if you put it in a big enough computer, you can just evolve it deterministically and just say everything there is to say about our universe. But I'm also more than happy to admit that a lot of things make that totally impractical in our universe. And so we do have to spend a lot of time thinking, what are the limits of our knowledge within this universe? What are we allowed to know and not know about what's written on that big whiteboard in the bigger universe? So Laplace's demon is basically good as epistemology, but impractical as engineering.
Already in the 18th century, towards the end, Immanuel Kant recognized this is nonsense and that we cannot mathematically model natural systems. And he wrote this already in Kritik der Urteilskraft, one of his three most important books, the Critique of Judgment, I think it's called in English, where he describes already that for natural systems, the mathematical models don't work.
Come on, we can't mathematically model natural systems. That's just how all useful engineering gets done, by mathematically modeling natural systems. It seems like you're being very strict about getting like 100 digits of precision in your model or something, but we seem to always have models that do the job, don't we? Right? That's why we're enjoying a high standard of living, because the people who built all the nice stuff that we get to enjoy had mathematical models that were good enough to do the job. That seems to be the state of affairs for intelligent beings, is that they have engineering powered by mathematical models that technically they're not perfect, but they're good enough to do the job. Good enough to do the job.
And then in thermodynamics, it was thoroughly proven that this is the case. But people like Harari and Elon Musk, they don't know this and they don't appreciate it. And so they believe that all this can be done. And why is it wrong? Because all of this would require us to be able to model what's going on, to have equations that describe it.
Thermodynamics just says that anytime you increase the entanglement of your own knowledge representation with the world around you, anytime you increase your knowledge so that the universe seems more regular to you, you've done that at the expense of taking some nearby region of the universe and making it less known to you, more chaotic to you, hotter to you, because there's apparently a deep relationship between the uncertainty of your knowledge state and the temperature. Crazy stuff. But anyway, thermodynamics doesn't say that you can't engineer extremely precise systems that are predictable to you. It just says that you can't literally know where every atom in the universe is at all times, but nobody's even trying to, right? As long as we're willing to go pump out a bunch of exhaust of atoms where we don't understand their exact configuration, which we are, there's no problem doing that. There's plenty of atoms that we can shoot off into space. It's not a problem. As long as we're willing to make that sacrifice, then we can have arbitrarily good understandings of the systems that we're working on engineering, which again, in practice, we're all familiar with going on Amazon and selecting from millions of products that all are engineered well enough to do the job. So engineering does actually work.
For example, intelligence. Intelligence is an omnigenic property. So most of the genome, 80,000 loci in the genome at least or more, are needed to explain only 70% of the variance of intelligence between individuals if you measure this with genetic methods. So there are thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of factors that make up intelligence. And so that intelligence is not, there's not 2 or 3 genes that lead to intelligence, but it's a super complicated property. And because it's so complicated, we don't know what in the genome we would have to change to make somebody more intelligent.
The delta in the naturally selected portion of the genetic code of the human brain and the common ancestor of humans and other apes, that delta is maybe a megabyte of information. So there's a megabyte of genetic code coding for the different proteins that make the human brain develop differently and have all of that IQ increase that we have compared to the other apes. So if the other apes have an IQ of like 50 or whatever you want to call that, and we have an IQ of like 100 or even 150, right? There's no ape that gets close to having 150 IQ. That huge meaningful delta is maybe a megabyte of genetic difference. So when Jobst is saying, oh my God, how are you ever going to unpack 80,000 genes? Okay, yeah, it's not easy, but 1 megabyte leading to this much useful functionality, I think we can take a crack at it. I think we got a shot. It's not that much, especially since the brain has a lot of regularity. It's not like it's 1 megabyte of like the most compressed code you can imagine. A lot of it is like, okay, make these cortical units and then just like make them a bunch of times and then make them learn from the information you're getting. Like there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of regularity. So it is a tractable engineering problem. And a lot of us, like Geoffrey Hinton, like a lot of AI experts, think that we're cracking a lot of this intelligence by building the LLMs and the AI systems that we're building. A lot of us think that we are hot on the heels of what the human brain is doing. A lot of us think that we've figured out high dimensional embeddings. A lot of us think that we've cracked how the human brain solves the symbol grounding problem. So that may or may not be correct, but at least I can confidently say that there's a lot of regularity, that there's not that much high entropy, that there's certainly not something that thermodynamics is preventing us from learning. That's not the issue here. We have plenty of neg entropy. We're not getting overly chaosed out here. Like that's not the issue.
The same is even true for much simpler properties like body height. Body height is also a property that is encoded by tens of thousands of genetic loads. See? So we don't know how it comes about. So we cannot manipulate a human genome, even if we could technically manipulate it without harming the individuals, which we can't. Even if we could do that, then we would not be able to genetically change this because we don't have the mathematical models to do so.
Come on, we can totally make people somewhat taller. I don't know what the state of the art is, but if you told the world's best geneticists that it's really important that they get together on a well-funded project and go create a race of humans that are all 7 feet tall or 8 feet tall or, some incremental improvement per generation, they could probably make it happen. Like these height genes are not that far beyond the range of what we currently understand. This seems like a very tractable problem. Now, could I have one generation where suddenly all the humans are 12 feet tall and still healthy? No, but that's not because of some fundamental chaos limitation. It's just because it's a hard engineering project. So there's a spectrum of engineering project difficulty. Going to Mars is a very, very difficult engineering project, but it's not because the world is chaos and chaos makes everything impossible. No, it's just hard. Some projects are harder than others, but we're working on them, right? It's not a fundamental problem to do these projects.
And for some diseases we have, and these are very simple diseases, which are called Mendelian diseases. For those like hemophilia, which is factor 8, disease where factor 8 is genetically dysfunctional. So if you could, for example, you can select embryos, you can do in vitro fertilization until and select embryos that don't have the genetic defect, and then you can implant this embryo into a mother, and then the child will be cured. This you can do because there's only one genetic locus that is causing the disease. And there are around 1,000 to 2,000 such diseases which are known, and they are called Mendelian inheritance diseases, and they can be manipulated. They could, in theory, be manipulated genetically to be cured. But these are monogenetic diseases. But for most diseases, there are thousands and thousands of factors causing them, which we don't understand. We don't understand how they interact. But it's not that we don't understand it yet and we'll soon understand it. It's we can never understand it because what we can model mathematically is massively limited.
So again, I get that it's hard. If something depends on 1,000 genes, then it's hard to model it. But is it impossible? No, there's a lot of predictability to it. We're getting there. You would have been out here on this podcast 5 years ago being like, oh man, protein folding is so hard. There's so much chaos. And now we have AlphaFold 3, which is predicting a lot of what you need to know about protein folding. Not 100%, there's still a ways to go, but a lot, an amount that a lot of people thought might be many decades away. When we put our best engineering resources at a problem and we wait 10 years, 20 years, we make huge progress at these problems. I think Jobst is being very selective to point at things that today still seem really hard, and he's not zooming out and looking at the perspective. Like if we were standing here 100 years ago, I could have shown you like the idea of a flight simulator. I'd be like, do you realize how hard it would be to simulate flying a plane? How many calculations per second you would have to make in order to realistically give somebody the experience of being in a flight simulator? Whereas now we just do in fact have computers that use a ton of calculations and also a ton of algorithmic shortcuts and give you a very compelling experience of a flight simulator that tests show that the flight simulators train pilots as well as the real plane, right? So things that kind of seem impossible, right? Or the idea of like, oh my God, transmitting a high quality video around the earth really quick. Do you know what kind of technology somebody would have to build to transmit signals like that? It's like, okay, but we did that, right? Or like, you know, going to a moon, like making a rocket land itself, right? This thing that SpaceX accomplished. Do you realize how hard the guidance would have to be to make a rocket land itself when the air is so chaotic, right? I mean, these things all look like miracles when you're decades away from doing it. In the case of SpaceX, it looked like a miracle when it was like a year away from doing it, right? But it's just like, give human engineers some credit. You have to distinguish fundamentally whether you're looking at a problem that's intractable for a fundamental reason so that centuries from now they still won't solve it, or you're looking at a problem that's, okay, a couple decades away from our engineers, right? You have to try to distinguish. Don't put everything in the same bucket. I don't think Jobst has said literally anything that is more than a decade or two beyond the reach of our engineering.
That has to do with the thermodynamics and the theory of complex systems. From this, we know that. And that's why the dreams of transhumanism, of digital immortality, of AI don't work. And what we can achieve in reality is much more modest. And if we understand this, and that's what I'm doing for a living, then you can really make things work and improve a lot of things and get great inventions. And, you know, it's then really fun to apply the mathematics if you know how they work and what is their limitations are. Then you can apply it. But these dreams that basically overestimate totally what can be done with mathematics, that doesn't work.
I like that Jobst is basically making an empirical prediction that genetic engineering is basically hitting a wall, because I don't think we're seeing evidence of that. I think genetic engineering is just plowing along, and I think we're seeing more and more success on genetic engineering of food, for instance. I think we're going to see more and more embryo selection have successful results for things that are even more than monogenetic. So that's my empirical prediction, right? So I also could be wrong, but I think I have a pretty accurate sense of how the trend is moving here. And I don't think that thermodynamics or chaos is putting up an impenetrable barrier. I think it's putting up a slope, and I think that our technology is climbing the slope, and I think that that's how human engineering always works. We just climb the slope to solve the next harder problem.
For me, it seems like it comes down then to worldview, where they're espousing this sort of a materialist worldview. And
This word materialism has two definitions. In philosophy, it means nothing exists except matter and its movements and modifications. So yes, you got me. I'm a physical materialist. I think everybody should be. It also has another definition that's more of the common parlance, which is a tendency to consider material possessions and physical comfort as more important than spiritual values. Okay, I'm not a spiritual guy, so I guess technically I'm the other kind of materialist, but I'm actually not, because I'm not somebody who's like obsessed with physical goods. I'm equally obsessed with human relations and like my family being happy. So I think I'm actually not a materialist in the ordinary parlance, but I think the accusation of materialistic people who only care about goods and not spirituality, I feel like that connotation gets sneaked in when people like Jobst and Hervoye put these labels on their philosophical opponents. Like, yeah, we're good Christians, but these materialists only care about having the fastest car and the nicest mansion and also modeling everything as atoms bobbing around. They'll never have what we have, which is a Christmas full of love, not toys, and a better understanding of ontology.
I was going to ask you then, is singularity like a pagan pipe dream? And then I saw you did a talk a year ago where you said it's a neo-pagan pseudo religion. And so before even seeing you say that, in my mind, I felt like this is sort of like a pagan pipe dream, this transhumanism, because you look at the things that they're talking about, they reject the notion of, like, just using Ray Kurzweil as an example. You talk about Yuval Harari. They dismiss this notion of God, or this biohacker, this wealthy Brian Johnson, I think is his name.
Yes.
He was recently on Tucker Carlson. The things that he says are so, in my view, blasphemous,
Insane.
against God, saying we can become gods. And I think this goes back to the core of their worldview, which is pagan, it's Gnostic, it's New Age. It goes back to the Garden of Eden, where the serpent says you can become gods, and this is the stuff that they're openly talking about today. So, any further thought on this idea of this pagan pipe dream, or as you call it, neo-pagan pseudo religion?
There's a lot of people on the non-doomer side, like Mark Andreessen, who love busting out this accusation that AI doomers are religious, man. They're just starting their own religious cult. So it's not surprising to see Hervoye and Jobst come along the same lines, being like, look at these neo-pagans trying to make like their own version of God. It's just funny that they followed up by being like, it's all about the Garden of Eden, man. It's all about God not being able to access your soul. That's the truth, okay? We know what's up. Not these other religious people, but our kind of religious people. So like in their mind, religiousness isn't a slur. It's just like more of a religious dispute. Like we're the pagans now. Okay. And of course, the better approach to all this is to just put the religious labels away and just argue on the object level, for God's sake. But I think we're past the point where we're expecting strong arguments from Jobst. I'm afraid this is starting to turn into more of like a roast, but let's see what his other points are.
So they don't have religion anymore because, since Voltaire and David Hume said there is no God, this became very fashionable in the West. And now we Christians are a small minority in the West. I think in all Western countries, including even your home country, Croatia, we are just a few percent who are still real Christians. I mean, among Catholics, it's formally a few more are still part of it, but those who really understand, for example, what the crucifixion and resurrection mean, we are just a few percent now, right? And so we have become a minority, like we were at the beginning in the 1st and 2nd century AD, where we were also a minority. And so the most of the elites are now thoroughly agnostic or atheistic.
Hell yeah. Since they've already moved past their actual argument, which is like hand-waving about chaos and thermodynamics, and they're already at their payload where their mask is off and they're just talking about how like their religion is more insightful than science, I wonder if there's a version of their argument that's like their true argument, because at the beginning, Jobst mentioned that he wants to make a non-theological argument, an argument that's going to be convincing to the atheists out there. I wonder what his theological argument is, right? What's his true argument that convinces him? Maybe it's the same, maybe it's not. I don't know. But anyway, let's listen to this exercise in projection where he accuses the doomers of secretly having a religion and filling the same hole that people like him need to fill.
The human need for religion doesn't go away. Schleiermacher did cover this. He wrote a very important book about the fundamental need of religion in humans. And so if you take away traditional religion, there needs to be a replacement religion. And this is, of course, the first country to create such a replacement religion was France. They created socialism and materialism, right? And so Abbé Mirieu created socialism in 1753 with this, I always confound whether it was Code de la Nature or Système de la Nature. One is by d'Alembert, the other one is by him. I always confound them, but in the 1750s, he created the first socialist manifesto, and then Lamétrie created this die-hard materialism. And they did this because they thought there is no God, and so they replaced it.
Okay, wait a minute. There's a third definition of materialism, Lamétrie's die-hard materialism. So I looked this up, and apparently Lamétrie was an 18th century French philosopher, and he wrote a book called Man as a Machine. And it really is just the basic physical materialist idea, which is like, hey, man is made out of smaller components that are inanimate. They follow the laws of physics, and together, like a machine, they create the full animated behavior that you see from the human being. And in this book, he says man doesn't have a soul because it's just a machine. As a modern materialist, I'm not sure that I would instantly agree, oh, sure, people don't have a soul. I mean, it's definitely true on an ontologically fundamental sense. If you make a Lego kit of the building blocks of the universe, you're not going to put a soul in the Lego kit. You're not going to have an ontologically fundamental mental entity. You're not going to have dualism. So I think Lemaitre is right on that count that there's no ontologically fundamental soul. But I can imagine, having not read the book, I can imagine he might have taken the concept too far and been like, oh, well, there's no soul, so like it's okay to hurt people, or like you don't really feel anything. I can't confirm whether Lemaitre was able to layer on this principle of emergence, of multi-level emergence on top of the concept of materialism, because that's the thing. Like when you acknowledge that the universe is just made out of like fundamental particles and physical principles and is a big machine, once you acknowledge that, you also have to make sure to acknowledge that dynamic, qualitatively different things emerge at higher levels. So you don't just get to say like, oh, there's no feelings, there's no emotion, there's no qualia, there's no soul. It's like, hold on a minute, hold on. That can still emerge from the lower levels. All you're saying is that there's no ontologically fundamental soul. So I just want to clarify that, because I don't know if Jobst realizes that a heartless materialist like me, or perhaps Lemaitre, I don't know if he realizes that we still appreciate the experience of being human, the richness of being human. We just don't think it's ontologically fundamental. We think it's a higher level phenomenon that emerges via reductionism. There's another one of those loaded words that goes hand in hand with materialism, right? We have a reductionist view of the human experience, but like reductionism doesn't mean bad. Reductionism doesn't mean siphoning the good stuff out of life. It just means explaining it in an elegant way.
And then Max Stirner created an even worse form of egoistic materialism in his book about the only one and his property, which it's called, where he says that the goal of humans is to realize themselves perfectly and only themselves, and to be God for themselves, their own God. And so these are these materialistic religion that came after the Enlightenment got rid of God, and they are now dominating basically our culture.
I don't know if the author in the book he's citing, which I've never heard of, I don't know how much that accounts for people's attitudes today. Maybe he's just saying people's attitudes today are in the tradition of this random book as mediated by a bunch of other thinkers. I don't know.
And so now is the question, by what do you replace God?
I don't really like this question, because a lot of people are just born and don't think that much about God and don't necessarily feel a desire to replace God. So my oldest kid is 5 now, and I haven't seen him yearn for a replacement for God yet. So, maybe he'll have teenage angst and he'll want me to replace God for him, but it just hasn't happened yet. And maybe it never will, right? So replacing God, I kind of reject that as a question. I don't think that humanity necessarily needs to replace God if people don't even know about it in the first place. Like, it's kind of a bad idea. It doesn't really make sense. And we don't have to recreate the idea just so that we can replace it. We can just ignore the idea, just like we ignore all kinds of bad ideas. Like, we never replaced human sacrifice. We just ignore that as an idea because it's a bad idea. So I consider God a bad idea.
So in esoteric spiritualism, it's sometimes replaced by the devil, like by Blavatsky, and this whole tradition based on corpus hermeticum and the classical esotericism. That's one strand. And then there's another strand which uses technology as the new religion. And Heidegger thought this clearly. He called technology the metaphysics of the 20th century, right? I don't like Heidegger that much, but he was right in this regard. And he said he rejected metaphysics and said, and now technology has become our new metaphysics. And going even further, a new religion, which he didn't say, but which it is now. So for them, they now believe in technology in an irrational, almost transcendent way. And the transcendent needs of these people is now projected onto technology. So they use technology to basically satisfy that needs of the transcendent. That's how it works.
Okay, so what do I really use technology for? I mean, I am a transhumanist, and it's not like I have a religion hole that I need to fill. It's more like I have preferences, right? I live in the universe, and I would rather the universe be more accommodating to what I like. I mean, I don't need it. If you told me, hey, the universe is what it is, you don't get to transform it, I'd be like, fine, that's fine. I'm still happy to be alive. I'll take what I can get. But if you tell me, hey, what do you want to make out of the universe? I'll be like, let's see, can we make intellectual challenges? Can we make really comfortable zones where you can just have like the ultimate spa experience? Can you make like even cooler extreme sports? I'll just have ideas for stuff I want to try as opposed to not getting to try anything, right? Now, Jobst can come in here and be like, oh, you're filling your religious hole, or you're just treating this ability to create experiences as your new God. And I'm like, okay, all right, man. Like, I don't see it that way, right? I would rather not be accused of doing that kind of stuff. I just don't have a better idea of what I can do if I'm allowed to do stuff, right? I just want to do stuff. And then if you say, hey, how about this? How about if the universe is just paperclips? I'm like, I would actually rate that a lot lower than not transforming the universe at all, right? I would actually pay a lot of money. I would spend a lot of effort to avoid all of our generations being turned into paperclips and having no human future, right? That seems like a bad outcome. And then, of course, Jobst would come in and be like, oh, so that's your God not being turned into paperclips? What? It's just like, stop with the God stuff, man. I'm just trying to determine what state the universe is going to get into, okay?
Now, what they get wrong is that they don't understand that technology, because it's based on mathematics, and mathematics is limited, can only do so much. They over-expect what technology can do, and they are irrational about it. And that's a pity, because if you are starting to use technology in an irrational way, you're creating damage, right? And so we see now in many areas where technology is not used optimally anymore because they don't have a realistic picture of what science can achieve and what it cannot achieve.
I'm pretty sure that Jobst's position here translates perfectly to 500 years ago. So you can go back to the year 1524 and you can play Jobst's same arguments to people then. And they'd be like, yeah, Jobst is right. We shouldn't just lean on technology because mathematics is limited. It can only do so much. So we shouldn't try to harness the energy of fossils, right? We shouldn't try to build ourselves air conditioning. We shouldn't try to build skyscrapers. We shouldn't try to go to the moon because mathematics is limited. Why do we hope to do all these things, right? So Jobst really needs to be a lot more precise about what we can realistically hope to accomplish with engineering versus not. Or sadly, what the AI can hope to accomplish versus engineering, right? I mean, the reason I make this podcast is not just to argue that we as a species can engineer a lot of things. It's to argue that AI can engineer things so much better than we can that we are about to be rendered powerless, right? That's usually the argument that I spend my time making here. So it's funny because I'm arguing with Jobst from a position of techno-pessimism toward techno-optimism. But normally I have to flip back from techno-optimism back to techno-pessimism when I say, oh, we're like Icarus, we're flying too close to the sun. We're about to get disempowered by our own creation because of how powerful engineering can be. Pretty funny.
What can then machine learning, AI, AGI, I don't know, what can it realistically then do?
Yeah, so it is part of the Industrial Revolution, right? It's a great mathematics-based technology that can achieve a lot. So wherever you have repetitive patterns, you can identify them and use them to create something, to create some automation. So let's go through a couple of examples. So in warfare, for example, a very important task for warfare is to detect the movements and everything the enemy does. And there, in the Ukraine war, both sides are completely using AI. And without it, the side that cannot use AI cannot see anymore what the enemy does. Because nowadays on the war battlefield, many sensors are deployed. Optical sensors, vibration sensors, acoustic sensors, pressure sensors. A lot of sensors are deployed. And there are many of them, thousands and thousands. They are also, then they have satellites that get signals. So there's a lot of sensory material that is created from the sensors that need to be processed. All of this is done by AI. The AI aggregates all these signals and then creates a view of the battlefield for the officers who are in charge of planning the attacks and the defenses. And without this, modern warfare is unthinkable. So this is, for example, a way where AI is used a lot. For offensive weapons, it's much harder to use because basically to be offensive weapon, you need active perception. Now, Barry Smith and I believe that active perception cannot be modeled mathematically, because active perception is a highly complex property of complex systems like intelligence. And so active perception means that you have a constant interaction between movement and perception. So like when you hear something, you turn your head towards it, and then you refine your movements to appreciate it. You see this in hunting animals, how they behave, this is called active perception. And it's a very complicated phenomenon we cannot model well in robots. And so which is very hard to model. We can approximate it to a certain extent, but very poorly. That's why attack weapons use less AI. They use some AI, but it's much more primitive. So that's an example for warfare.
Whoa, okay, I love this because he made such a clear testable prediction saying that AI can't and won't be used as a war attack weapon. Are you kidding me? We're seeing drones from Russia and from Ukraine that are getting better and better at flying over their target, chasing their target, and then killing their target. That's not active perception. You can only have AI do defense and you can't have it do offense. I mean, again, I love that he's being concrete enough that we can prove him wrong in a matter of like days. In a matter of like, I would argue he's already being proven wrong. But like 2 years from now, you don't think there's going to be slaughter bots? You don't think there's going to be a robot that can chase you down in the battlefield and kill you the way a human soldier can, or even a dog can? I mean, he may be right? There's like a few percent chance that he's right, but it just seems like he's so close to being so thoroughly, objectively disproven. So I just hope that once he is, he'll open his eyes and be like, uh-oh, maybe AI can just do a lot of the stuff that we take for granted that animated matter like the human brain can do. Maybe the separating bar is nowhere near where I've imagined that it is. Maybe I need to do a serious update and like flip my position 180 and become a doomer. I just, I don't know the size of the update that he's going to make when he gets objectively proven wrong by the facts. Or, of course, it could go the other way, right? If we're talking 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and for some reason, nobody's ever using AI for offense in the battlefield. Like they always need a human on the radio using a video signal to control these devices. If for some reason that's the case, okay, then I'm wrong, right? Then I have to figure out, wow, how did Jobst have this great insight? But I'm just highly, highly skeptical that things are going to work out that way. I feel like he's obviously in the wrong, but I'm trying to be fair.
Wherever there are regular patterns, AI can be used can be leveraged to do the work, but it cannot be creative, it cannot become conscious, it cannot become intelligent. It can just automate repetitiveness, and this we will see more and more. And so I estimate the potential of automation that in the blue collar work is still quite high. So there's still a lot of blue collar work where there's manual labor involved, where we can use AI and robots to automate more. But in white collar work, the type of work we are doing, the potential is below 10%. So I think people like all these, doom prophets that say, oh, AI will take up so much work of humans, that's wrong, because they believe that AGI, which is general intelligence, can be done. But in the end, what you only have is very narrow AI that can solve efficiently some limited tasks. This will continue to evolve, but it will not revolutionize the workspace for white-collar jobs.
This is normally where I would reply, okay, you seem to be overconfident, so let me challenge you. Give me a prediction of 2 years from now, the least impressive thing that AI still won't be able to do, with 90% confidence. So if you're so sure that AI is so limited, then fast forward 2 years and just give me the least impressive thing that AI still won't be able to do. In Jobst's case, he already said he doesn't think AI can be used for attacking. So that's such a good answer. That's such a bold, sticking your neck out prediction that I'm happy to say, okay, he said it, he met the challenge. That's actually worthy of respect of his side. So let's just wait a year or two, or let's just check the news today and let's see if AI is suddenly being used for attack, and let's let Jobst update his mental model based off that. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead to a random part where he starts saying that AIs can't understand text and video, which just seems super outdated to me in the wake of the multimodal models we're seeing today. Let's listen.
Digitization allows to acquire data about individuals and the masses in a much more comprehensive and thorough way, and to especially store them so that you can go back and look up. However, this is the critical point now, because AI cannot think, you can't use AI to digest the material. So an AI that you would put onto this conversation that we have now could only use some keywords to gather some very, very, very superficial patterns, or phrases, but it's very superficial. It doesn't really understand what we're doing. It never will. So machines cannot understand text. Neither does ChatGPT, nor will machines never anytime understand text, and videos are even harder to understand, because videos also contain not only text pragmatics but also visual pragmatics, which means the meaning of events and that are visual and verbal, and how they interact. It's super complicated. I mean, if you watch a scene in a movie and you think about what lets you understand the scene. It's not only what's being said, but also what the people do, how they interact with the environment. So you cannot automate this. And so therefore, machine interpretation of videos and text is impossible. And so that means that those organizations that are the equivalent of the Stasi, like secret services, let's take China, which has, of course, such a service, but in the West, you have also such services, though they are a bit different, but still, they can store a lot more about us, but mining it and interpreting it still is human work. And so AIs like in Minority Report, who can perfectly predict the behavior and then target the individual, that this is just an illusion, because it supposes that AI understands what humans say and how they act, but it really doesn't, and it never will. And so therefore the dangers of the abuse of technology come more from digitization than from AI.
If Jobst has said this like 5 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, it makes sense. Humans can talk in a way that's like lightly encoded, in a way that's going to fool the AI, where the AI is not going to notice that they're actually plotting to sabotage the government. That would have made sense back when AI wasn't very good at talking and understanding language, but have you tried it today? Today, this idea of picking meaning out of sentences, or of noticing what frames in a video might mean, like explaining a scene, explaining a joke, explaining all the different elements. These are some of the strongest points of the modern AI that we have. Like if you just go play with these chatbots, just drag into them files and ask them to explain them and analyze them and find different properties of them. Even a cheap model, even Llama or GPT 3.5, some of the smallest, cheapest models still do a really excellent job at that. And they can index a search based on very deep embedding vectors. So this idea where Jobst is saying, oh, no, you're going to need a human to review that kind of content. If you ever want to control society, if you ever want to do effective surveillance on all this data, you're going to need a human watching all that data. What are you talking about? That is just so not true about modern AI. Never mind super intelligence 10 years from now. I'm just talking about today's AI. It seems like Jobst's clip is from 5 years ago, but it's not. It's from 2024. In this next part, Jobst makes a pretty long speech about how science is so hard, it's like pushing a boulder up a hill. You have to have so much modesty. So how could anybody claim to be a scientist and hype up such a crazy claim like super intelligent AI is coming and we might all be doomed and it's going to extinct humanity? How does everybody have the confidence to say something so wild when science generally proceeds with small insights at a time and you have to be modest? Let's listen.
For AI, we shouldn't be afraid of it, but we should use the real science, the sober science, the modest science. Real science is very modest, and it's because if you do science for a living every day, you know how hard it is to get replicable result. You're not wanting to hide anything. You just want to do this very hard work that requires a lot of patience and endurance and resilience to pursue this over so many years. And then you are just modest because, it's so hard to get so little done, and sometimes geniuses come around like Einstein, but even he had to suffer enormously to come to his theory. It was a long and hard way for him, especially to get from the special to the general theory of relativity. He needed to work with a lot of mathematicians. It was super hard. And so this is how science works. And so when politicians, economists, or people from the humanities talk about science, you can already immediately tell that they haven't been through this experience of creating science and being in it. That's why they can talk in this insane way about it that is detached from it, like Harari. He has never, ever done an experiment, of course, in his whole life, But if you've done an experiment or if you have tried to prove a mathematical theorem, it can take such a long time. And it has nothing to do with anything, it's not as great an experience as it looks then afterwards, but it's just a hard process. And so when you have gone through this all your life, or even just 10 years, you start as a PhD student and then you do a few years postdoc, then that how it really is, and that the hypes don't make sense. And I think the worst are scientists who know this and who still nevertheless participate in the hype, because they are basically undermining what science really is and what it is about.
It's true that science on average is a slow and incremental process, and most discoveries have a bunch of little discoveries leading up to them, And usually you don't make a single discovery that makes you think, uh-oh, extinction's happening in our lifetime. So I agree that this is rare, but it's not unprecedented. I mean, there's so many eureka moments in science, right? I mean, he mentioned Einstein. He mentioned the breakthrough that was special relativity. Like, hey, what if light really is just the same speed in every reference frame? How about that? Okay, that's kind of a eureka moment. There's the original eureka moment, right? Archimedes in the bathtub when he realizes that displacement of water is one way that you can measure the volume of something. That's pretty good. Another eureka moment happened in 1980 when some geologists were digging in Italy, and they were like, wait a minute, this part of the soil represents 66 million years ago. What is iridium metal doing here? Why was that in the atmosphere? Normally that only comes when there's an asteroid impact. What's going on? And then slowly one thing led to another, and they're like, wait a minute, was there a giant meteor impact 66 million years ago? Is that maybe what killed the dinosaurs? And they're like, wait a minute, where's the impact crater? Oh, it's kind of under our nose here in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's just kind of buried, but now we can detect it. There's actually this giant crater. Oh, wow. So that was like a major event equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. Oh, okay. I guess the dinosaurs got wiped out by an asteroid and it wasn't just like a slow dying off. Oh, interesting. Right? So these eureka moments do happen and they rewrite your understanding of the world pretty significantly. So it's not that surprising that people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who opened up a book when he was a teenager and read about AI, was like, oh, hey, what do you know? This is going to drastically change the future of humanity, that AI is about to get smarter than us. Or Geoffrey Hinton's eureka moment apparently happened just a couple years ago when he's like, wow, I'm so surprised by how rapidly GPT-3 and GPT-4 are progressing that I am now kind of turning white because this isn't the future I was hoping for or expecting. This is something much scarier. So having your prediction of the future dawn on you to be something different than you thought before, it's just not uncommon, right? It's not the most common case, but it happens all the time. And just to throw in another one, I guess I really like talking about this, but Robin Hanson's 2021 paper about grabby aliens. I mean, just a year ago, I'd heard Robin Hanson talking on a podcast, speculating about the Fermi paradox, not really having a good answer. Next thing you know, 2021, he has very compelling evidence and a very compelling model of like, oh, it's just a big land grab. We're early. Aliens are on their way at like 10% of the speed of light or something like that. And we're going to see them in a billion years. And that's how the universe works. That's how cosmology works. It's a land grab among aliens. That is a huge, huge insight. I always say on this show that it's underappreciated, but it's an absolute eureka moment. So I don't know why Jobst is basically saying science has to proceed incrementally. So don't believe the hype that people are telling you, hey, we might all be about to go extinct. Sorry, that is actually the beauty and the power of science, that it can have these moments. I would frame it that way. Except in this case, it's like the worst news ever, but it's exciting.
I think science is about finding out knowledge for the benefit of mankind. And when you basically use science to tell people how dangerous everything is and how catastrophic everything is, that is politicized science, and that's very dangerous, and it's basically destroying science.
Imagine that the non-doomer side is using good scientific methodology, and then they arrive at their conclusion that we're not doomed. That's great. That's good for them. That's good for everybody. But then to turn around and say, don't use science to reach the conclusion that we're doomed, that makes a mockery of their own methodology that they use to conclude that we're not doomed. Because if they used a good methodology to conclude that they're not doomed, then it had to have been a methodology that was open to concluding that we're doomed. You can't come out and say you know we're not doomed because you never considered the possibility that we're doomed. You see what I'm saying? So it's such a huge red flag if a non-doomer comes out here and says, it's bad to say we're doomed. Science doesn't mean saying that we're doomed, because that just shows that they've been closed-minded the whole time about their idea that we're doomed. You have to come out here and say, hey, it's absolutely true that we might have been doomed, but I'm happy to tell you that the evidence says that we're not doomed. Not because I had a restriction on ever believing that we're doomed. I have to be able to believe that we're doomed. You know what I'm saying? That's science. Your ability to believe something rationally is dependent on your ability to also believe the opposite, and for the evidence to be what guides you one way rather than the other way. You have to be able to conceive of the possibility that you actually live in the other universe. So in other words, Jobst, what I'm trying to say is when you just come out here and rant about doomerism, you're just pre-assuming that you're right and we're not doomed. Unfortunately, I think that that assumption is incorrect. I think that we are doomed. And so, unfortunately, given that we are doomed, the best thing you can do is fearmonger about how doomed we are until people get the right level of fear. Because right now, the level of fear that people have about AI, the average person actually does have a significant amount of fear, but unfortunately, it's too low. There is a major miscalibration of the amount of fear that the average person feels about AI, and it's just sad. It's sad to be sleepwalking into the whirling razor blades of our entire species, of our loved ones, in the year 2024 when we ought to know better.
The fear of AI comes from the erroneous view that AI can become conscious and have a will. That's totally impossible mathematically and also from the perspective of physics and biology. And when you remove this irrational fear of AI having its own will and consciousness, then it is just a normal tool.
That's such an inaccurate characterization of what doomers claim. It's not load-bearing to the doomer claim to say AI can become conscious. If you look at the attack drones that are being used in the Ukraine war right now, they're just good at tracking somebody so that they can't escape and then firing. They're good at targeting. And from the perspective of the person being targeted, there's no off button. It's not controllable to that person. So imagine that for some reason, they become uncontrollable to their creator, or they become self-sustaining, kind of like a virus on the internet where it starts manipulating hundreds or thousands or millions of people at once, and it becomes really hard to turn off. Maybe it'll never turn off, right? It'll just live in our software ecosystem forever, like some viruses from the early 2000s are still alive, and they're still causing $1 billion a year of damage. We know that software systems can be self-sustaining. It's all just a matter of degree. We're not positing some kind of fundamentally new thing here. We're just saying you take a virus, you add the ability to outsmart humanity in more and more ways to greater and greater degrees. And where do you end up? Where is this going without some sort of breakthrough in control or, research that we don't have right now? So it doesn't really need a will per se. It needs the level of optimization power, the level of goal-orientedness that we're already seeing in other systems. Like, it's not that hard to just architect a software system saying, hey, try to work backwards from this goal. Try to take actions that are helping you get this goal. And if that's the sense that he means of having a will, then okay, yeah, it needs to have that kind of trivially definable will, but it doesn't need to be conscious. And then Jobst additionally says, hey, that's mathematically impossible. That's impossible from the perspective of physics and biology, which is totally false. We're not saying anything fundamentally impossible here. So he's not even giving us basic credit for what our actual argument is. Now you might wonder, why am I even doing an episode on Jobst when his argument is significantly weaker than the average argument that I'm here pushing against? Well, I see my contribution to the discourse as maximizing the convex whole of people with the best arguments and people with the biggest audience. And he has a reasonable size audience from what I gather. So I think I'm adding value by just adding this to my comprehensive list of episodes where I show you the non-doomer position, the different types of non-doomer position that people take seriously. And I do think there's value in just showing you the spectrum of ways in which they're wrong. There's so many different ways to be wrong as a non-doomer. It's pretty tough, right? It's why the discussion is so hard to have. It's why we need to bring together top people to debate as a society. We need this kind of conflict resolution technology. We need the social infrastructure of debate. That is the viewpoint of Doom debates. And as I mentioned before, when you're supporting Doom debates, you're not just supporting a guy like me who's yelling that we're doomed. You're also supporting the social infrastructure of being able to debate a topic like whether we're doomed from superintelligent AI, which is a complex topic. Okay, that's all we got from this particular appearance of Jobst Landgrebe. Essentially, his whole argument of why we're not doomed comes down to the crux that it's physically impossible that we're ever going to get a superintelligence that's beyond human level, because it would require building a system that could be like a low-level physical simulation of a human brain. But we can't do that because that would require such fine-grained information modeling, and that's just impossible because of thermodynamics. So we can only have these cruder systems that will never match what the human brain can do because chaos prevents us from seeing what the human brain can do. It's a common type of argument, but it's just very clearly, obviously wrong. Unless you're hell-bent on making like a quark for quark copy, then maybe you can't. But the idea that that's the bottleneck to making a super intelligent system We just have so much evidence that that's not the case. I'm willing to die on this hill that we're not going to stop superintelligence because of the chaos of doing a low-level model of the human brain. I'm sorry. That's just not going to stop it, which is why I think you're not going to see Jobst have predictive accuracy in anything he says. I mean, he did actually stick his neck out and make a prediction. He said you're not going to see AI being useful for attacks. That's a very bold prediction that I think is already falsified, or if not, it'll be falsified next month or next year. Jobst seems to be kind of stuck at an intellectual dead end where he's not really participating in the current discourse of serious doomers versus more serious non-doomers. I guess the most serious group of non-doomers are the people at the AI companies or the people with their own AI research organizations who are saying, okay, yes, it's a problem, but here are all the ways we're fighting it. And the ways we're fighting it are going to be good enough matches to the difficulty of the problem, and we're going to pull through that way. I disagree with them. From my perspective, I think it's very likely that the problem is much harder than the quality of the solution that they're bringing to bear on it. And I think that it's very wishful thinking to think that their caliber of solution is up to the caliber of the problem. But of course, I hold out hope that they're right because I don't have anything better to hope on besides pausing AI. Besides that, I thought it was interesting that Jobst is very open about being a devout Christian, and he clearly connects his views on AI and technology futurism with the many different views that he has about being a Christian, which I don't really know, but I could just tell that he thinks about it a lot, right? He brought it up a bunch of times in the interview, including some times that I didn't clip in my edit. If you want to see the rest of the interview, I really don't think you're missing much. I think I clipped everything that was relevant to the doom argument, but there's a few more things he says, so feel free to check it out on the Geopolitics and Empire podcast. Jobst, you're more than welcome to come on and debate me. I think it could be a great conversation to compare our views in more detail, because I do admit that when I do these reaction episodes, it is one-sided. That's totally fair, and I would love for you to come on. Just email me, wiseguy@gmail.com. Besides that, we got a lot of good stuff coming up on Doom Debates. There's a handful of other things that I want to react to, especially doing a review of some prominent people's positions that I think is wrong in interesting ways. So that'll be fun to go through. I've got more debates coming up. I've got some episodes coming up where I just try to explain a concept, see if you guys like me doing things that way. I guess if I do it that way, it becomes more similar to Rob Miles' YouTube channel. So go to YouTube and search Rob Miles. He's got a lot of really great stuff where he just explains concepts in AI safety really, really well. All right, if you want to support the channel, it's always welcome. We are marching our way to 1,000 subscribers, so please do your part. We got to get 4-digit subscribers here. It's a little ridiculous that our subscriber count is 3 digits when objectively this is clearly like a 4, 5, or even, dare I say, 6-digit podcast objectively in terms of number of subscribers that it should have before the world ends. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all your feedback and contributions. Some of you have also written in with fact checks and pushbacks, which I think is great. So keep that coming. And let's keep triangulating what kind of content is the most valuable for me to bring to the mainstream. Because I see myself as kind of a messenger, somebody who's been marinating in the AI doom scene for like 15 years and now trying to communicate to the mainstream. I feel like I have a lot of different stuff that I can bring forth, and I want to see what works. So hit me up in the YouTube comments or shoot me an email, wiseguy@gmail.com. Let me know. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Doom Debates.
If you turn to God every day, then you get the confidence to lead a meaningful life and to find the solution.